Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to show you the top 10 art creatures with special abilities. So without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? In at number 10 we have got the Thylacoleo, and the reason why I'm putting this creature here is I just think it is so valuable to the art community, and also just as a general creature you can get so much use and versatility out of this creature, and it also does spawn on the island as well, so it is hugely accessible to all you Ark players out there, as everyone does have the island obviously. These things spawn in the redwoods and are a relatively easy tame. There'll be pretty much no issues there as long as you do prepare for it. Some people say that these are quite difficult, but for me I've never found them difficult whatsoever. And if you just prepare, make yourself a decent trap and be careful and find one and actually look and be careful of the environment around you, then once you've found one you can just knock it off of a tree by aggroing it, and then after that just lead it into the trap and trank it out. It is as simple as that, and it really does not get any harder than that, apart from if there's a lot more hostile things in your area. You definitely do want to prepare for this. Again, it's all really in the preparation. If you prepare properly, you're going to have yourself a much better taming experience, and you are going to love this creature once you've actually got your hands on one. These things are fast and have insane amounts of mobility. They can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface, and they also do have the bleed ability, which really does play quite a huge part in this creature's role of being a great special ability creature, as this really does drive it forward and gives it great damage output against other creatures, and it really elevates it as a creature. Sadly, it's not allowed into bosses, but still you can get insane amounts of use out of this creature, and it really does have to be on the list here for this reason, and I can't have left it out. Next up we have got ourselves the Yuty, and this creature is so useful for doing any kind of boss fights with its special ability that I have to include it here. Although there are loads of other creatures with really cool other special abilities as well, I still do have to merit some of the obvious ones, and the Yuty is an extremely obvious one, with its courage roar aiding your creatures in battle, allowing you to deal more damage to the enemy opponent, probably a boss, considering you'll be using these things for boss fights, but it could also just be all those general minions as well that the boss will spawn if it does spawn those. And also on top of that, it does have a fear roar as well, which you can use to ward off enemies of certain sizes, although obviously again there is a size limit on that, so it's not really going to work. You can't just get the broodmother to run away from you by enacting the fear roar, but still you can use that thing to great use, and I would recommend that you do use it in some boss fighting scenarios. It really can be useful in some cases for just deflecting off some of the minions if you really do need to hold back and, you know, give some space for you to get through. Sometimes it can help fix you getting stuck in a boss fight, which is useful, but you're mainly going to want to use that courage roar, and obviously that's just going to buff up your creatures and they're going to take less damage, and it's really going to be useful for you. Next up we have got the Maewing, and this creature is here just because it is so useful for any kind of travel up in the air, and that really does make it such a great special ability creature. Maybe you might consider gliding not to be a special ability, but I do, and it does act as a portable feeding trough as well, so if that doesn't count as a special ability, then I don't really know what your definition of special ability is, because not really any other creatures have the ability to do that, and therefore it is quite inherently special, unique as well. But that gliding ability is found on creatures like rock drakes, but I just find it easier to control on things like the Maewing, and the Maewing is definitely a star creature when it comes to travel. Like I said, it just gains so much speed, and you can tame it so early on. Very easy tame as well, dead cheap to trap, so easy to trank out, and you're really going to have no issues with taming this thing whatsoever. The only real downside is the maps that it spawn on, because maybe they're not the most friendly to get because they cost money. Not sure if they're on pre-order though. If they are on pre-order, then it's not too much an issue, but if they're only on Gen 2, then you're just going to have to get Gen 2 to get one of these things, but they might be on pre-order considering how successful these things were as creatures. Next up, we have got the Snow Owl, and this creature is here for its healing ability. It really is like, it's so priceless in a sense. Like, it's so invaluable. I just can't live without having this ability on an art creature. And although maybe it's not the most inventive one out there, it does definitely have a wealth of them for you to experience. So, you know, it's not going to get so high up on the list, but I think it does at least deserve that number 7 spot, at least, because, you know, you can just get insane use out of this creature, and it's just going to be so useful for you over all of your arc playing. It really is going to pack a huge amount of punch with that gliding ability first, so you can really get some speed on it. Also does have some sort of infrared, like heat seeking ability, you could say, and that is going to just allow you to seek out any kind of organism that gives off heat, which I'm pretty sure is every single creature in the game. Useful for PvP if you're trying to track down players, or PvE scenarios when you're just trying to find some smaller creatures that are lost. You can kind of use it like night vision as well. You also want to crank up that stamina, because these things freeze and heal creatures, that being wild creatures, your own creatures, or enemy creatures. Don't know why it heals up some enemy creatures unless you maybe just feel bad for them, but for your tame creatures that's pretty self-explanatory. But for wild creatures, maybe it's not if you haven't really played much arc. But either way, if you're trying something out and, you know, its health isn't particularly doing that great, then you can just get one of these things and heal it up, and boom, you're going to have yourself a healed tame, and its torpor's really not going to go down that much, and your tame experience is just going to be a lot nicer. You can also use the snow owl pellets on things like gachas to get some insane loot out of them. So if you haven't already, get yourself a snow owl. Next up, we have got the Astrodelphis, and I think this creature really does just play quite a huge role in general arc playing, and also it really does just aid in any kind of transportation around the map, as they can move at incredibly fast speeds, which is obviously extremely useful. The Tropoignathus is another great creature here, but I kind of do prefer the Astrodelphis on quite a lot of levels. Not in terms of model design and looks, the Tropoignathus is better there, but it's a lot more acrobatic, and for me, somehow, I just find it a lot easier to control, and I like how it just generally moves around. The animations are nice, and obviously the model does look pretty cool as well. Your only real downside is that saddle level, and taming it might seem a little bit expensive on the first hand, but you know, it isn't the worst of the worst, especially considering you're on Gen 2 when you're taming these things realistically. Again, not sure if they're on Fielder, they might be on Fielder, but Gen 2 is really easy for getting any kind of element, so it's not going to be too much of an issue whatsoever, at least most of the time. But yeah, really fast, really agile flying mount, and I do just really like this. It's like in a lot of ways the Astrocetus, but it does a different job and better. At number 5, we have got the Rhynio, and this creature is here just because it is so packed with features, and I really do have to merit it for all of that. It does stand as a very great special ability creature, being able to pick up creatures of such great sizes up to things like Rexes and Paraceratheriums. It also kind of shoots a sort of lasery projectile-y thing, and I guess you might not classify that as a special ability. It's a little bit weaker on the side of special abilities, but for me that does, especially the picking up creatures of such large sizes. That is an ability which no other creature really does have, and that is just a really cool one, really inventive in a lot of ways. Maybe not the most creative, but it definitely adds quite a new, different dimension to the game, especially considering in ASA at the moment, cryopods aren't a thing, so this is your only way of really transporting those big creatures around the map, unless obviously you're using a Quetzal with a platform saddle, but obviously that creature is not on the list, and the Rhynio is in a lot of ways just the more convenient option. Its taming method is just the exact same as the Reapers, except it impregnates a dino. The Bronto is preferable, at least from my exploration, and also you need a lot of resources as well if you want 100% effectiveness. They were on screen there, but I don't really think they are too necessary to tame these things, as you're not going to be using them in bosses and things like that. So there's not really a point, in my opinion, to get 100% effectiveness. Even if I was taming a boss creature, I probably wouldn't even bother to get 100% effectiveness. Just feed it like a better food. In this case, obviously, it's not going to need really food. It is going to have cravings where you can give it those resources to get 100% effectiveness, but for my purposes, I don't really think it's that useful, and I've never done it myself. And I definitely do prefer the Reaper's gathering XP, because it feels like a bit more of a challenge in some way, and also being more enjoyable at the time, because it really does give you a lot of incentive, as it's something you do throughout the game to level up, but now you're doing it on a Reaper, and that's just, it works for me, whereas this not quite as much, but really inventive, cool special ability creature. Next up, we have got the Reaper, and this thing is just so good with its special abilities. It can slow down creatures with its tail attack, and also on top of that, it is just generally a really cool creature. And although maybe it doesn't have the hugest amount of special abilities, the only real one you could be saying is that tail attack. I've put it so high on the list because it's simply such a great creature, and I'm pretty sure it can kind of go underground as well, or you might not be able to do that. I might be sounding really stupid when saying that if I look at the Reaper's abilities. Let me just quickly search up Reaper arc abilities, because I need to refresh my mind. Yes, they can burrow underground, and then they can do those acidic projectiles. There we go. I was right, not sounding completely stupid, but yes, those two abilities really cool and inventive on top of an already pretty much near perfect creature, and especially with that amazing taming method, really was a huge innovator of the time. It does deserve to be on the list for the best special ability creatures, and especially considering there's an R version on Gen 2, so they're ridiculously easy to tame now. Everyone can really get their hands on them as long as they have Arboration or Gen 2. Next up, in at number 3, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is just jam-packed full of all kinds of abilities. It really does deserve a spot on the list, and obviously that is why I'm putting it here. It's just, it has the hydration buff, it has insane amounts of mobility. Its taming method, in a sense, you wouldn't really call a special ability, but definitely is something new, special, and interesting. Maybe not so new anymore, considering Gen 2 came out at least a good year and a half ago, 2 years maybe. I'm not actually sure of the date. I think it was summer of 2022, so about a year and a half. They also do have the ability to charge up their damage over time. They can go invisible as well. Obviously, they have the pack buff, no bleed ability, have the hydration buff though, so they really are packed with the stuff. And also on top of all of that as well, they're great swimmers, and they really are a creature which I think you should be going out for, and you should be getting in your arc progress as long as you can bear that taming method. But trust me, it really is worth it. They're great boss creatures and just great all-rounders. In at number 2, we have got the Desmodus Draculae, and this thing is here pretty much just for its sanguine elixir. It really does just aid it so much as a creature with a special ability. It makes it insanely easy to tame creatures like Bloodstalkers, which is actually one of my favourite creatures, and I probably should have put it on this list, considering you could definitely count it as having a special ability, but I guess I'll give it an honourable mention now. I definitely do think it deserves it, as long as creatures like the Velonosaur, the Managama, those creatures are some really great suggestions as well, and I love those creatures to have in my Arc arsenal, and they really do have some nice, great special abilities on them. But the Desmodus here has the gliding ability and go invisible as well, although it can't do that in the Wasteland Biome because there is no night cycle, because you can only do that at night. It can also grapple onto any kind of wall or vertical surface, and it can farm blood bags and can craft sanguine elixir, so it really is just such a go-to creature for being an Arc special ability tame. And finally, in at number 1, we have got the Deinonychus, and this will always top my lists for Arc special ability creatures, depending on what the new creatures bring though. Who knows, maybe they could top the charts after this, but really this is just my go-to special ability creature. It has high amounts of mobility and really doesn't break the bank when it comes to taming these things, requiring such little amounts of resource, and also really not too much technical difficulty as well. Maybe not the easiest in the world, requiring you to go to the Chalk Cliffs biome and steal an egg out of the nests of the Deinonychus, and then obviously escaping them without dying. But it honestly isn't too bad, especially if you have yourself a crossbow and a grappling hook. You can just grapple yourself up into the cliffs, and it really is going to be a quite easy time for you. And if you have a Pteranodon as well, that is going to make this stuff even easier. And then once you have one, you have such a mobile creature which is capable of doing tons of bleed damage to bosses, and it can also grapple onto all kinds of big creatures as well, inflicting even more bleed damage. These things also do not take full damage, which is just a nice bonus for me. They have the pack buff as well, which again does aid them in defeating bosses and just general damage dealing, and they can climb up any kind of wall, vertical surface, things like that. Although maybe not as elegantly as something like the Thyla, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but after that you really don't notice it. And I hugely enjoy the Thyla, not the Thyla, the Deinonychus. I do enjoy the Thyla, but the Deinonychus more so, and that's why it's in at number 1. In at number 10, we have got the Velonosaur, and I really personally think this definitely does have to make the list. It is often, in my opinion, very forgotten about, and also, on top of that, it is extremely cool and useful to me, and Wildcard have never revisited this creature, at least in like making a new one that's similar to it, that uses that same ability of essentially firing darts from its body onto other creatures. And maybe, I guess, maybe you shouldn't do that because, you know, like, it would not be too differentiated from the Velonosaur. Obviously, the Velonosaur did come out with Gen 2, but still, I feel like Wildcard could explore this idea even more, or give the Velonosaur some kind of TLC as well, because I do admit it is good. It is just really sad that its damage doesn't scale with its bullets, and you could really utilize that ability, which it has, even more, and get so much more use out of it, and make it cooler. Obviously, by adding more damage you can actually make those better, and you could do like different kinds of bullets, like you have different plate types on something like the Stego. Like, you could have some that curve around walls, like, you know, homing one. You could have ones that like set fire to things, one that freeze things. I kind of a bit Pokemon with all the different like fire, earth, but you could really get some good use out of it. Next up, we have got the Gasbags, and I feel like this creature is really cool and very inventive, and as a fantasy creature it really just works for me, and I really find it such a great one. Like, I love the way it works and how it's implemented and how it moves around the map, because yes, it definitely does take quite a bit of a learning curve to actually fly these things somewhat efficiently, and in this speedrun I'm absolutely terrible at flying it. Sorry for the atrocious gameplay, you're just gonna have to deal with it, I guess. Either way, they're not the easiest thing to fly, but I can see how it would ergonomically work, and nowadays I am a lot better at flying these things. This B-roll is a little bit old, and I should really consider updating it. I'll probably do that in the future at some point. But, you know, you still get the representation of the gas bags, and you can see how it works. Essentially, you level up your oxygen, and then that will give you gas, and then the gas allows you to fly around the map, because obviously that's what you use, and it will slowly deplete as you keep going. The one kind of downside about these things is they do take full damage, and also taming them can be pretty annoying because it's pretty buggy, and you definitely do have to be careful about that full damage, as if they run out really high in the air, considering they're not too easy to control, especially in the early stages, and you'll probably be doing this more in the early stages. You go up way too high and then just simply run out, and then you'll just kind of fall to your death, or you use a lot of damage. So not a lot of damage, you use up a lot of health. What am I talking about anymore? My brain is confuzzled again, like it was in yesterday's video. Either way, yeah, you don't want to do that. Obviously, if you do end up in that, you can simply just dismount just before you hit the ground, and it's not really that much of an issue. The only real issue then is just getting out and away from all of those pesky creatures which lie, you know, just on the ground. Obviously, the Wyvern isn't a ground creature, but there was a lot of corrupted Wyverns down there, and then I ended up just going way too high to the top of the map, so it really just shows. You definitely got to be careful with these things, but I really think they're cool, and I love the way they're implemented. Next up, we have got the Crystal Wyvern, and this creature is here just because it kind of expands on what the Wyvern does, and in my opinion, it just does it better. Its taming method is so much easier in my opinion and a lot more simple. I know it is locked behind a level 65 level, like wall essentially. You've got to get to level 65 to be able to tame this thing, and you do need the primal crystal, so you need to knock out one of these wyverns to actually get that primal crystal. But doing a note run isn't that bad, and knocking one of these things out can be very simply done with a pretty relatively inexpensive trap and some tracking arrows and a crossbow, or you could even just use a bow, but you know, you'll probably have a crossbow by the time you tame one of these things, and they're just so good, and you get pretty much the full wyvern experience, which I'm confident is the same really. Obviously it's different because it's different style of wyvern. You get the hydration buff on these things, seemingly a little bit kind of useless considering it's a flyer and they can't go in the water, but still you do have that. And with that blood crystal wyvern, it just, their main ability is so cool and so useful and so effective. But people really do like this just normal tropical crystal wyvern, I think it's called, something like that. Not really too familiar with the name of these things. I usually just call them the crystal wyverns. But yes, they, in my opinion, are definitely very deserving of being on the list, and I just simply had to put them here as I really do enjoy having these things on my side and taming them. They are just a dream to have. Next up, we have got the snow owl, and this creature is here just because of how full it is with all of those abilities, and you really can't let it down for all of those. It just packs so much in terms of all of its great abilities. It has to be on this list, and it also just becomes sort of a better version of the griffin in my opinion. Although yes, maybe not as speedy. I will give the griffin a brief mention. It's not on the list. It definitely could be worthy of being on the list, and I might be tempted to switch out the Volans or something like that, or maybe put it instead of the snow owl. It really just depends on personal preference, and for me, everything that the snow owl does, I feel like, you know, the griffin does, but like not as well maybe in terms of obviously speed. It's faster, but I just prefer this creature because it's a bit of an all-rounder for me. It's got that glide ability, so you can pick up the speed. On top of that, it's also got a heat-seeking ability, more useful for PvP players, as you can see if any people are trying to raid your base, or if you've trying to find someone, you know, if they have raided your base, or if they've been trying to, then you can quickly track them down like that. And obviously if you're trying to find any small creatures or just creatures that are lost in PvE, works as well, and it works quite well as a sort of night vision camera as well. And also on top of that, they do heal up creatures as well with their freezing ability. Don't know how many times I've said as well, probably far too many. Either way, you can freeze those creatures up, and then from that, obviously, it's going to heal them, and it can be any type of creature, enemy creatures, your own creatures, or wild creatures. And wild creatures kind of add a new dimension to healing creatures, which the Den doesn't have, which is if you're taming something, and then, you know, you put loads of tranks into it, and it's really low on health, and you can just quickly heal it up with one of these things, and obviously it's going to freeze it, so it can't deal any damage back to you. Also, on top of this, they do give off snow owl pellets, which if you feed them to gachas, you are going to get yourself some really, really great loot. And I know it has been nerfed since release, but it is still definitely worth doing. And there's just so much you can get and do out the snow owl, especially considering how easy these things are to tame. And the saddle is like completely inexpensive. It's just so easy and nice to get one of these things, and you can just get so much use out of them. They really are worthy of being on the list. Next up on the list, we have got the Astrodelphis, and this creature just travels at such great speed, and I get so much use out of that speed that I really have to put this thing on here. And the Tropiognathus really does come in handy as well, but that's not really a fantasy creature, so I can't put that thing here. Obviously, it's just not going to be on the list because it was a real thing. Not is, because it's not alive anymore. It has gone extinct. Either way, this creature can really rack up tons of speed, and although maybe not the friendliest tame on the surface, you are going to be taming this thing more late game, maybe mid game. Like Gen 2 is quite an easy map, so your perspective of things does get changed, but that saddle level being in the like 100 teens, I think it is, around, you know, that is quite a huge requirement for the saddle of this thing. But you know, I don't mind that too much, especially just you can really get a lot of use out of this thing. And if you also want to just get good at flying these things, you can always just do the missions and you don't actually need one yourself. So then when you do actually tame one, you can already just be a perfect flyer of these things. I don't know why, but that's just what I did, because I wanted to be able to fly these things well, and I kind of knew there'd be a little bit of a challenge, at least for the start. That's just generally how I am with new creatures like this. I hadn't really used a Tropheonatus much back then, and I was just like, right, I'm just going to learn from this. Kind of did the Maewing a bit like that as well, although they are just tamed so early on, you know, you really don't have to struggle with getting those things to tame. In at number 5, we've got the Rock Drake, but I'm also going to kind of put it as a duo set of creatures, and I'm going to put the Maewing here as well, as that is a tremendously great glider, capable of so much speed. It also acts as a portable feeding trough, and you can grab the berries too and glide along the surface of the water, and it's a pretty good swimmer as well, and it definitely should not be underrated for that. And now talking about the Rock Drake, it is a really great glider. I think it was the kind of the first one introduced to Ark, and it packs so much damage, and it is your only real source of travel on a map like Arboration. And I really enjoy how this creature just generally flies around the map. Obviously it doesn't fly, but still, like, you know, this creature is just, it's so elegant in how it was designed, and you can tell Wildcard put a lot of thought into this thing. It really does fit into the map. It's just generally got a really cool model design. It looks really cool, and taming it, although is pretty much just the same as the Wyvern tame. You go get the egg, not from a trench, but just from a general nesting area down in the red zone, I think it's called. And then yeah, from there you get the Rock Drake egg, and then you get out and then use the air conditioners to do it. You're not going to really need, or not really going to want to use campfires, because you need such a specific temperature. It's not even worth doing it. Not even sure if it really can be done with campfires, because I can't remember if it's a really low temperature or a really high temperature. Probably high, considering it's incubation, but you never know with these things, and once you play loads of weird wacky mods, you're going to get some very weird incubation temperatures for things. Either way, they are particularly harsh on things like the Rock Drake, so use air conditioners, because then obviously that egg is not going to fail to hatch really, as long as you've got enough, and yeah, you're going to be perfectly fine. Next up, we have got the Desmodus, and this creature is here because it has Sanguine Elixir. It is a blood bag farm, and it is just capable of doing so much. It's a glider as well, and personally I do think it glides even better than something like the Snow Owl, and you can really tell it is an extremely high quality creature because of those animations. And I know it's not really going to affect how these things actually handle, because they already handle tremendously, but it really just show that Wildcard put quite a lot of effort into this creature, and the creatures just keep getting higher and higher quality as they're introduced into the game, and it is really nice to see all of these cool changes, and that is just why they are such nice creatures to use. And I really enjoy having creatures like this. It just makes my day, and having a creature as good as this, which can also gather blood bags and get to one of my favourite tames, which is the Bloodstalker, so I can tame more of those things as well. It's a really nice thing to have, and obviously that Sanguine Elixir does a third of the tame like that with a click of a button, and that gliding ability is nice. They can also go invisible at night as well, but I was in the Wastelands biome, so I couldn't show that to you. In at number 3, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here just because it really is like sort of an epitome of a style of creature, which is sort of where the Thyla is in a way, and it just does everything the Thyla does, but better. Obviously it can't really climb walls or vertical surfaces, but it can jump to immense heights, which the Thyla can't, so it can still get that sort of range and get up things quite easily. And also on top of that, does not have the bleed ability, which is other downside. Sounded like I was going to say compliment there. I kind of was, and then I decided to mention that. Either way, these things do have the hydration buff, which the Thylas don't. On top of that, they do have the pack buff, which Thylas don't as well. And another actually downside, I know these are number 3 in the list, and I'm still talking about downsides, is the taming methods, because it's god awful and I hate it. But they're really good swimmers in the water, capable of so much damage. They have such high mobility in packs. They can go invisible and do all kinds of crazy stuff like that. Obviously they get the pack buff, and they deal so much damage. They're such nice creatures to use and handle. They had to be on the list. In at number 2, we have got the Rhynio, and although my opinions aren't the best on this creature, I do admit it is a fan favourite of many, and that is why it has been pushed up into the number 2 spot. Personally, it wouldn't have really been on the list for me, as I find it is way too OP, but that can't really demote it for being such a great fantasy creature, and you can get so much use out of this thing. I did have to put it way up high in this list, as I do admit it is definitely nice to have sometimes. And when thinking about it, it can just pick up such a wide range of creatures like Rexes and Paraseratherians, which really didn't seem possible back in the early days of Arc, and it's nice to see that sort of progression. Again, does feel a bit off that I can pick up creatures of that size, but it definitely does come in real handy, especially in ASA, considering cryopods aren't out at the moment, and they probably won't be here until extinction releases, or the community might sway the devs to add them in a little bit earlier, as it is quite an inconvenience to say the least. Also, these things deal tons of damage as well, and they have some really cool abilities, very nice animations, and the model is packed full of detail as well. The tame method is pretty much just ripped from the Reaper, and I do have a taming guide, so if I remember, I'll leave a card up there, and also you can just search it if I actually do forget, if you're wondering how to tame one. But you know, you probably do know how to tame one by now. They have been out for quite a while, and obviously they're maybe not the most difficult to tame, and people do make them out for being quite difficult. But if you have a net launcher or some kind of simple trap, and you have something which is capable of doing quite a lot of damage, and you do have something like the magnifying glass, or on ASA you can just download the awesome Spyglass mod, as mod accessible to everyone. And obviously you got yourself a Bronto. You don't really need all of those resources, because I don't know why you'd want 100% effectiveness for this thing. It's not really a boss creature. It's not going to make too much difference, really, at least from my use of it. It's not actually too bad to tame. But just before we get into number 1, I do have to mention a few creatures, which are the Noglin, because I think that thing is just really cool. Really nicely implemented. I also want to mention the Bloodstalker, my favourite underwater tame, but it didn't really make the list because it's not maybe the most popular for everyone out there, and there are just so many other creatures which I still want to put on their list. The Astrodelphis is another really great shout as well. The Void Worm, often forgotten about, do really like that creature as well. So without further ado, let's get into the number 1 spot. And in at number 1, we have got the Reaper, and this creature is here just because it fits in so well with its map, and although maybe not the most inventive design for a creature, pretty much just the alien from Aliens, or Aliens, depending on what film you're watching, or it could even be Aliens 3, who knows, just that one, the Xenomorph. I think it's like kind of code name in the general Arc like code, or you spawn it in, is like Xenomorph thing, something like that. It's definitely not the Reaper, because it's not called that. Some people might think of the what is it called? The Grim Reaper, if you say Reaper. But in Arc, obviously, it's this Xenomorph thing. It's capable of doing so much damage as well. You feel like an absolute god when using it, and you can slow down creatures with its tail attack too. On top of that as well, it was the first to introduce that really cool taming method, where it impregnates you once you get it to a low enough amount of health, and then you keep its pheromones, and then you use its pheromones to actually stop it from... then will stop the baby once it's born from killing you, and obviously while it's still inside you, you get loads of XP to get that thing up to 100% effectiveness. Really nice progression, and it really feels like you do have to work for this creature, but it really feels like it is all worth it in the end. And their model design is so perfect, and they really do fit into the map tremendously well. And I just really like the progression of these things. And with the R-Reapers on Gen 2, they're ridiculously easy to tame, so if you've never tamed one before, maybe start there first. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed, as I definitely did enjoy making it. As always, comment down below what is the best Arc Fantasy creature to you, and if you didn't agree, put your 10 best fantasy creatures in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.